The rain had started 20 minutes ago, and Grace Lawson was still 6 blocks from home. She pulled her jacket tighter and quickened her pace, her sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the amber glow of streetlights. 12 hours on her feet in the pediatric ward, 3 back-to-back emergencies, and a little boy with leukemia who had held her hand while she read him stories until he finally fell asleep. She was exhausted down to her marrow, but exhaustion was familiar. Exhaustion was the price of survival. 2 jobs, 60 hours a week, the mountain of her mother's medical bills shrinking so slowly it sometimes felt like it was growing instead. Her sister's tuition due next month. The rent that never stopped coming. Grace didn't complain. Complaining took energy she didn't have. She was passing the old cathedral on Mercer Street when she saw him. A child. Small. Dark-haired. Standing motionless on the sidewalk in nothing but pajamas and bare feet. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead and soaked through his thin cotton shirt. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Grace stopped dead. She looked around, searching for a parent, a guardian, anyone who might be looking for this boy. The street was empty. The windows of the surrounding buildings were dark. At 2 in the morning, this part of the city was a ghost town. "Hey there." She approached slowly, crouching down to his level, keeping her voice soft. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Where's your mommy or daddy?" The boy didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. His dark eyes, huge in his pale face, stared at something she couldn't see. Something far away and terrible. Grace had seen that look before, on the children in the oncology ward, on the kids who came through the ER with injuries they couldn't explain. The look of a child who had witnessed something no child should ever see. "My name is Grace," she said gently. "I'm a nurse. I help kids when they're hurt or scared." She held out her hand, palm up, an offering. "Can you tell me your name?" Nothing. Not a word. Not a sound. Just those dark eyes, hollow and haunted. Grace's heart clenched. She couldn't leave him here, soaked, freezing, alone in the middle of the night. Whatever had happened to this child, whatever had brought him to this empty street, she would figure it out later. Right now, he needed warmth and safety. "Okay," she said softly. "You don't have to talk. But I'm going to help you, all right? I'm going to take you somewhere warm and dry, and we'll find your family together." She shrugged off her jacket and wrapped it around his thin shoulders. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't lean into the warmth. Just stood there like a statue, lost in whatever nightmare was playing behind his eyes. Grace lifted him into her arms. He was lighter than he should have been, all sharp angles and fragile bones. She tucked his head against her shoulder and started walking. Her apartment was small, a studio on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. But it was warm, and it was safe, and right now, that was enough. She set the boy on her couch and wrapped him in blankets, made him hot chocolate that he didn't drink, found a pair of her sister's old socks, too big, but dry, and eased them onto his frozen feet. Through all of it, he never spoke, never moved unless she moved him, never made a sound. "You're safe here," she told him, kneeling in front of the couch. "I promise. Whatever happened, you're safe now." His eyes found hers for the first time, and in them, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not emptiness, but depth. A vast, uncharted ocean of grief and fear, and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "I'm going to call someone who can help find your family," Grace said. "Is that okay?" He didn't answer, but he also didn't look away. Grace reached for her phone and froze. Headlights swept across her window. Then another set, and another. The sound of car doors slamming echoed up from the street below, followed by voices, low, urgent, speaking in rapid Italian. She crossed to the window and peered through the blinds. 4 black SUVs had surrounded her building. Men in dark suits were pouring out of them, fanning across the sidewalk, their movements precise and coordinated. And leading them, striding toward her front entrance like he owned the city, was the most dangerous-looking man Grace had ever seen. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and shadows, beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Dark as midnight, burning with a fury that seemed barely contained. He looked up, directly at her window, and Grace stumbled back from the glass. She didn't know who he was, but she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that he was coming for the boy. "Sweetheart," she turned to the child, fighting to keep her voice calm. "Do you know those men outside?" For the first time, something flickered in the boy's expression. Recognition. And beneath it, fear. The buzzer to her apartment screamed. Grace's mind raced. She could call the police. But what would she tell them? That a group of men in suits had shown up looking for a child she'd found on the street? By the time they arrived, it would be too late. She could run. But where? There was only one exit, and they were already inside the building. The knock on her door was 3 sharp raps, a command, not a request. Grace took a breath, then another. Then she walked to the door and opened it. The man filled her doorway like a storm cloud, massive, dark, crackling with barely leashed violence. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the tension in his jaw, the desperate fury in his eyes. "Where is he?" His voice was low and rough, accented with something Mediterranean. "Where is my son?" His son. Grace's gaze darted back to the boy on the couch. The same dark hair, the same midnight eyes. Of course. How had she not seen it immediately? "He's here." She stepped aside, her heart hammering. "He's safe. I found him on Mercer Street, alone in the rain. I was just about to call." The man pushed past her before she could finish. He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of the couch, his massive hands reaching for the boy with a gentleness that seemed impossible given his size. "Marco." His voice cracked. "Marco, figlio mio, I thought—" He pulled the child into his arms and held him like he was made of glass. "I thought I lost you." Marco didn't respond. Didn't wrap his arms around his father's neck. Didn't make a sound. But he also didn't pull away. And from the way the man's shoulders shook, Grace understood that even that was more than he usually got. "He hasn't spoken," she said quietly, "since I found him. I don't know if he can't or if he can." The man's voice was hollow. "He chooses not to. He hasn't said a word in a year." A year. Grace felt the weight of that silence settle over her like a shroud. What happened to him? The man rose, still holding Marco against his chest. His dark eyes found Grace's, and she saw something beneath the fury now. Something raw and wounded and achingly human. His mother was killed. The words came out flat, stripped of emotion. "A bomb. Meant for me." He was in the car. He saw everything. Grace pressed her hand to her mouth. "I have people looking for him all over the city." The man studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "How did you find him?" "I didn't find him. He found me." She gestured toward the window. "I was walking home from work. He was just standing there, in the rain, alone. And you brought him here, into your home, a strange child in the middle of the night." "He was freezing," He was scared. Grace lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. What was I supposed to do? Leave him there? Something shifted in the man's expression. The fury didn't fade, but it changed, became something closer to curiosity, to respect. Most people would have called the police and kept walking. I'm not most people. The silence stretched between them. Grace was acutely aware of how small her apartment was, how shabby it must look compared to whatever world this man came from. Her second-hand furniture, her chipped mugs, the water stain on the ceiling she'd been meaning to report for months. But she didn't look away, didn't apologize. This was her home, and she had done nothing wrong. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Grace. Grace Lawson." Grace Lawson. He repeated it like he was memorizing it, filing it away. "I'm Alessandro Valenti, and I owe you a debt." Valenti. The name hit her like a cold wave. Everyone in this city knew that name, whispered in back rooms, printed in headlines that danced around the truth. The Valenti family had run the Italian syndicate for generations. Alessandro Valenti was rumored to have taken control 3 years ago after his father's death. She had just invited the son of the most powerful crime lord in the city into her apartment and wrapped him in her sister's old socks. "I don't want anything from you." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I just wanted to make sure he was safe." Alessandro studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Safe." He looked around her tiny apartment, the single lock on the door, the fire escape that anyone could climb, the windows that a strong wind could shatter. "You have an interesting definition of the word." "It's warm, it's dry, and nobody here wants to hurt him." She held his gaze. "That's more than he had on the street." The almost smile faded. Something darker took its place. "You're right." He shifted Marco in his arms, and the boy's head lolled against his shoulder, eyes finally closed. Asleep, Grace realized. The first time the child had relaxed since she found him. "You're absolutely right." He moved toward the door, then paused, turned back. "I meant what I said, Grace Lawson. I owe you a debt. The Valentis always pay their debts." His dark eyes held hers. "I'll be in touch." Then he was gone, sweeping out of her apartment with his son and his men, leaving nothing behind but the blankets on her couch and the echo of his name in her ears. Grace stood in her empty living room for a long time, listening to the rain against the windows. She told herself it was over, that she would never see Alessandro Valenti again, that by morning this would all feel like a strange dream. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she didn't want to examine, she knew the truth. This was only the beginning. 3 days later, a black car appeared outside Grace's apartment building. She noticed it on her way to work. Sleek, expensive, idling at the curb with an engine so quiet it barely made a sound. The windows were tinted dark. She couldn't see inside. It was there again when she came home. And the next morning. And the next. On the fourth day, a man in a dark suit knocked on her door. "Miss Lawson." He was tall and broad, with a face that looked like it had never smiled. "Mr. Valenti requests your presence." "Requests?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "Or demands?" The man's expression didn't change. "The car is waiting." She should have said no, should have closed the door and called the police and pretended that night in the rain had never happened. But something stopped her. Curiosity, maybe. Or the memory of a little boy's haunted eyes. Or the way Alessandro Valenti had looked at his son, like he would burn the world down to keep him safe. Grace grabbed her jacket and followed the man to the car. The Valenti estate was 40 minutes outside the city, a sprawling compound of stone and iron set against a backdrop of rolling hills and ancient oaks. Guards stood at every gate, Cameras tracked her from the moment the car turned onto the private drive. By the time they reached the main house, Grace felt like she'd crossed into another world entirely. The man led her through a maze of hallways, marble floors, oil paintings, chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen waterfalls, until they reached a set of double doors at the back of the house. "He's in there." The man stepped aside, with the boy. Grace pushed open the doors and stepped into a garden. It was beautiful, lush and green, filled with flowers she couldn't name, and the soft music of a fountain somewhere, out of sight. But she barely noticed the beauty. Her eyes went immediately to the two figures at the center of the space. Alessandro sat on a stone bench, still wearing a suit despite the casual setting, his posture rigid with tension. And beside him, perched on the edge of the bench like a bird ready to take flight, was Marco. The boy looked better than he had that night in the rain. Clean, dressed in clothes that fit, his dark hair neatly combed. But his eyes were the same, huge and hollow, fixed on some middle distance that only he could see. Alessandro looked up when she entered. Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or hope. "Miss Lawson, thank you for coming. Your man didn't give me much choice. He was instructed to ask, not to compel." Alessandro's mouth twitched, though I admit the distinction can be subtle. Grace crossed the garden and stopped a few feet from the bench. Marco didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. "How is he?" "The same." Alessandro's voice was heavy. "The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. His vocal cords are fine. His brain is fine. He simply won't speak." "Selective mutism." Grace nodded slowly. "It's a trauma response. His mind is protecting itself from something it can't process." "You know about this?" "I'm a pediatric nurse. I've seen it before." She crouched down, putting herself at Marco's eye level. "Hey, sweetheart, do you remember me?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, so slight she almost missed it, Marco's eyes shifted toward her. Just for a heartbeat. Just a flicker of recognition before the walls came back up. But it was something. More than something. "He remembers you." Alessandro's voice was rough. "That night, after we brought him home, he went straight to the closet where we keep the blankets, pulled out every single one and piled them on his bed." A pause. "He's never done that before." Grace's throat tightened. She thought of the boy wrapped in her old quilts, the way his eyes had finally closed in her tiny apartment. The first piece he'd found in a year. "Why am I here, Mr. Valenti?" "Alessandro." He stood, his massive frame blocking the sunlight. "And you're here because my son needs help that money can't buy. I've hired the best psychiatrists, the best therapists, the best specialists in childhood trauma. None of them can reach him." His dark eyes held hers. "But you did. In one night, in a shabby apartment with nothing but hot chocolate and old socks, you gave him something no one else has managed in a year. I didn't do anything special. You treated him like a child, not a patient, not a problem to be solved." Alessandro stepped closer and Grace had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I want you to work for me. Live here, at the estate. Be Marco's caregiver." Grace stared at him. "I have a job. A life. I can't just—" "Name your price." "It's not about money." "Then what is it about?" She thought of her sister's tuition, her mother's medical bills, the exhaustion that lived in her bones like a second skeleton. She thought of the mountain she'd been climbing for years, alone, with no end in sight. And she thought of Marco, the hollow eyes, the silent screams trapped inside him, the tiny flicker of recognition when he'd seen her face. "I want to keep working at the hospital, part-time at least." The words came out before she could stop them. "And I want to bring my sister here on weekends. She's in college. She shouldn't have to worry about where I am. Done. And I want you to understand something. Grace held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated by his size, his power, his name. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for him. If I think for 1 second that being here is hurting him instead of helping him, I'm gone. No arguments, no negotiations. I walk away. Alessandro studied her for a long moment. The garden was silent except for the fountain and the distant call of birds. Then, slowly, he smiled. It transformed his face, softened the hard lines, warmed the cold eyes, made him look almost human. You have a spine, Grace Lawson. I respect that. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? Grace looked at his hand, looked at Marco, still perched on the bench, still lost in his silent world. Looked at the future stretching out before her, terrifying and unknown and glittering with possibility. She took his hand. We have a deal. The first week was the hardest. Marco didn't trust her. Not really, not yet. He tolerated her presence the way he tolerated everything else, with a blank stare and a silence so complete it felt like a physical weight. Grace sat with him in the garden, in the playroom, in the vast bedroom that held more toys than any child could ever need. She didn't push, didn't demand, just existed in his space, a quiet constant in a world that had taught him nothing was safe. She learned his rhythms. He liked the garden best, especially the corner by the fountain where the sound of water drowned out everything else. He avoided the east wing of the house. She found out later that his mother's portrait hung there. He slept with the light on and woke screaming from nightmares he couldn't voice. On the 8th day, something changed. Grace was reading aloud in the playroom, a picture book about a bear who lost his family and found a new one, when she felt a pressure against her arm. She looked down and found Marco leaning into her, his small body pressed against her side, his eyes fixed on the pages. She didn't move, didn't speak, just kept reading, her voice steady, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. When the book ended, Marco didn't pull away, and when Grace carefully, slowly, put her arm around his shoulders, he let her. Progress. Alessandro noticed. He noticed everything. You're good with him. He found her in the library that evening after Marco had gone to bed. Better than anyone else has been. I just give him space. Grace looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. He's been pushed and prodded by so many experts. Sometimes what a child needs most is someone who isn't trying to fix them. And you're not trying to fix him? I'm trying to help him feel safe enough to fix himself. Alessandro crossed the room and sank into the chair across from her. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more human. His mother used to say something similar. His voice was quiet. That children don't need to be molded. They need to be witnessed. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. A shadow crossed his face. She was everything. The light in every room. The reason I wanted to be better than I was. He looked at Grace, and the rawness in his eyes made her breath catch. When she died, I thought I would die too. But Marco needed me, so I kept breathing, kept moving, even when every breath felt like broken glass. Grace didn't know what to say. The grief in his voice was so vast, so deep, that words seemed inadequate. I'm sorry. It was all she could offer. I'm so sorry. Don't be. He straightened, the mask sliding back into place. She wouldn't want sorrow. She'd want me to protect our son, to give him a life worth living. His jaw tightened. That's why I brought you here. That's why I'll do whatever it takes. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm of small victories and quiet moments. Marco began to seek her out, appearing at her door in the morning, following her through the garden, sitting beside her at meals. He still didn't speak, but his silences grew less hollow, more present. He started drawing, dark, chaotic images at first, full of fire and screaming faces, but gradually lighter. A dog he'd seen in the garden, a flower, a woman with auburn hair and kind eyes that looked remarkably like Grace. She pinned every picture to the wall of her room, and somewhere along the way, without intending to, she began to notice Alessandro. He was there at breakfast, asking about Marco's night. There at dinner, listening as Grace recounted the day's small triumphs. There in the garden, watching from a distance as his son slowly, painfully came back to life. He never interrupted, never demanded. Just watched, with those dark eyes that held more pain than any person should have to carry. "You're staring again?" Grace jumped. They were in the library. Their library, she'd started to think of it. And Alessandra was watching her from across the room with something that might have been amusement. "I wasn't staring. I was thinking." "About what?" "About how you're not what I expected. About how you look at your son like he's the only thing keeping you tethered to the earth. About how I can't stop noticing the way your hands move when you turn a page. About Marco," she said instead. "He's making progress. Real progress. Another few months, and I think—" "Miss Lawson." Alessandro's voice was soft. "Grace, you're a terrible liar." Heat flooded her cheeks. She opened her mouth to respond. A crash from somewhere in the house. Shouting. The sound of running feet. Alessandro was on his feet instantly, his body shifting into something coiled and dangerous. "Stay here." "What's happening?" "Stay. Here." He was gone before she could argue, disappearing through the library doors with a speed that belied his size. Grace stood frozen, her heart pounding, straining to hear what was happening beyond the walls. More shouting. A gunshot. Distant, muffled, but unmistakable. Then silence. Grace couldn't breathe. Marco. Where was Marco? She ran. The hallway was chaos, men in suits rushing past her, barking orders into phones, hands on weapons. She pushed through them, ignoring their shouts, following the path to Marco's room on pure instinct. The door was open. The room was empty. "Marco!" Her voice echoed off the walls. "Marco, where are you?" A sound, soft, muffled, coming from the closet. Grace crossed the room and pulled open the door. Marco was huddled in the corner, buried under a pile of blankets, his small body shaking so hard she could hear his teeth chattering. His eyes were wide and wild, the same haunted look she'd seen that first night in the rain. "Oh, sweetheart." She dropped to her knees and gathered him into her arms. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe." He clung to her, the first time he'd ever reached for her, ever held on like she was a lifeline. His fingers dug into her shirt, his face pressed against her neck, his whole body trembling. "I've got you." She rocked him gently, the way she'd rocked 1,000 frightened children in the hospital. "I've got you. Nothing's going to hurt you." Footsteps behind her. She turned, still holding Marco, and found Alessandro in the doorway. His suit was torn. Blood dripped from a cut on his temple. But his eyes were fixed on her, with an intensity that stole her breath. "What happened?" she demanded. "The Benedettis." His voice was ice. "The family that killed my wife. They tried to breach the estate." "Tried?" "They failed." Something dark and satisfied flickered in his expression. "They won't try again." Grace looked at the blood on his face, at the violence barely contained beneath his surface, and understood, perhaps for the first time, exactly what kind of man Alessandro Valenti was. what he was capable of, what he would do to protect the people he loved. It should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel something else entirely. Marco needs you. She rose, still holding the boy. He needs to see that you're okay. Alessandro's expression shifted. The predator retreated, replaced by the father, desperate, devoted, achingly human. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around both of them, pulling them against his chest. I'm here. His voice cracked. I'm here, figlio mio. Papa's here. Marco didn't speak, but his hand, small, trembling, reached out and gripped his father's shirt. And in that moment, something shifted between the three of them. Something unspoken and undeniable. A bond forged in fear and blood and the desperate need to protect. Grace didn't know what it meant, didn't know where it would lead. But she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she was no longer just an employee in this house. She was part of something, part of them, and nothing would ever be the same. 2 days later, the photograph arrived. It came in a plain envelope, slipped under the gate, addressed to Alessandro Valenti in elegant script. Inside was a single image, Grace's sister Emily, walking across her college campus, completely unaware that she was being watched. And scrawled across the bottom, in red ink, we know who she loves. We know how to hurt her. Grace's blood turned to ice as Alessandro placed the photograph in her trembling hands. They're coming for everyone I care about, she whispered. No, Alessandro's voice was steel. They're trying to, but they'll have to go through me first. Emily arrived at the estate within 6 hours, escorted by 4 of Alessandro's most trusted men. She was 20 years old, bright-eyed and bewildered, with the same auburn hair as her sister, and a stubborn set to her jaw that Grace recognized all too well. She'd been pulled out of her dorm room in the middle of the night, told only that her sister needed her, and driven across the state in a convoy of black SUVs. Grace! Emily grabbed her the moment she stepped through the door. What the hell is going on? Who are these people? Why am I... It's okay. Grace held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. I'll explain everything, I promise. You're safe now. But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure she believed them. The Benedetti family wasn't finished. Alessandro's men intercepted 2 more surveillance teams over the following week. One watching Emily's empty dorm room, another circling the hospital where Grace used to work. The message was clear. They were looking for leverage, looking for weakness, looking for a way to destroy Alessandro Valenti from the inside out. You should leave. Alessandro found her in the garden late one evening after Emily and Marco had both gone to bed. Take your sister and disappear. I have safe houses in Europe, South America, places the Benedettis would never find you. And Marco? His jaw tightened. Marco stays with me. Then I stay too. Grace! No. She turned to face him, and the fierceness in her voice surprised them both. I'm not running away. I'm not leaving that little boy when he's finally starting to trust someone. And I'm not... She stopped. Swallowed. I'm not leaving you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Alessandro stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the barely restrained hunger in his expression. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm a dangerous man, Grace. I've done things, terrible things. The blood on my hands will never wash clean. His voice dropped to a ragged whisper. You deserve better than this. Better than me. Maybe. She reached up and touched his face, felt him flinch, then lean into her palm like a man starving for contact. But I don't want better. I want you. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and fierce, and full of every emotion he'd been holding back. The grief, the guilt, the love he'd thought he'd buried with his wife. His hands tangled in her hair, his body pressed against hers. He kissed her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. Grace kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I can't lose you." His voice was broken. "I've already lost so much. If anything happened to you, nothing's going to happen to me." "You don't know that." "No." She pulled back to look at him. "But I know that hiding won't keep me safe. Running won't keep any of us safe. The only way through this is together." Alessandro closed his eyes. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he opened them again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by something cold and determined. "Then we end this. Tomorrow night. I have a meeting with Benedetti. A parley, to negotiate terms. He thinks I'm coming to surrender. And you're not." "I'm coming to finish what he started." His jaw set like iron. "One way or another, this ends tomorrow." The parley was set for neutral ground, an abandoned warehouse on the waterfront, halfway between Valenti territory and Benedetti's. Alessandro spent the day preparing, making calls, deploying his men like chess pieces on a board only he could see. Grace spent the day with Marco. They played in the garden, read stories in the library, built a tower out of blocks and knocked it down, over and over, while Marco's dark eyes slowly lost their haunted edge. He still didn't speak, but he smiled. Once, twice, 3 times. Small, fleeting things, like sunlight through storm clouds. It was late afternoon when Emily found her. "You're falling for him." It wasn't a question. Grace looked up from the book in her lap. Marco was napping on the couch beside her, his head resting on her thigh. "Is it that obvious?" "To me? Yes." Emily sat down across from her. "Grace, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You've been taking care of me my whole life. You've earned the right to make your own choices. But this world, these people." She shook her head. "Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" "No." Grace stroked Marco's hair, watching him sleep. "But I know what I'd be walking away from. And I can't do it, Em. I can't leave them." Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and squeezed her sister's hand. "Then I guess we're staying." That night, everything went wrong. Alessandro left for the parley at midnight, promising to return before dawn. Grace tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind, made her heart race. She got up and checked on Marco, then Emily, then wandered the halls like a ghost. She was in the library when she heard the door. Not the front door. The servants' entrance at the back of the house. The one that was supposed to be guarded. The one that was supposed to be secure. Grace froze. Listened. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Coming closer. She didn't think. She ran. Emily's room was at the end of the hall. Grace burst through the door, grabbed her sister's arm, and dragged her toward Marco's room. "Don't ask questions. Just move." "Grace, what?" "Now." They reached Marco's room just as the first gunshot echoed through the house. Grace scooped the boy into her arms. He woke with a silent scream, his body rigid with terror, and pulled Emily into the closet. "There's a panic room." Her voice was a whisper. "Behind the wall panel in Alessandro's study. If we can get there." The bedroom door exploded inward. 3 men in black, masks, guns. They swept the room with professional efficiency, their movements cold and precise. "There." One of them spotted the closet door. "They're in there." Grace shoved Marco into Emily's arms. "Run. The study is down the hall, 3rd door on the left. The panel is behind the bookshelf." "Go." "Grace, I'm not leaving you." "Go." Emily ran. Grace stepped out of the closet and faced the three men, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Well? The lead man laughed. You must be the nurse. Benedetti will be pleased. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was Valenti leaving you unguarded. He raised his gun. Now come quietly, or... Grace threw the lamp. It wasn't much. A wild, desperate move, but it was enough. The lamp shattered against the lead man's face, and he stumbled back with a curse. Grace ran. She made it 3 steps before hands grabbed her, slammed her against the wall, drove the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded through her skull. The world went gray at the edges. Stupid bitch. The man's voice was ugly with rage. Benedetti wanted you alive, but he didn't say anything about unharmed. The window exploded. Glass rained down like deadly confetti. Through the chaos, Grace saw a figure, massive, dark, moving with a speed that seemed impossible. Alessandro. He didn't speak, didn't warn. He simply moved, and men began to fall. The first one dropped with a bullet through his skull. The second went down screaming, his knee shattered by a kick that looked almost casual. The third, the one who'd been holding Grace, turned to fire. But Alessandro was already there, his hands closing around the man's throat with a grip like iron. You touched her. His voice was quiet, conversational, terrifying. You put your hands on her. Valenti, please. Please. Alessandro's grip tightened. Did my wife say please? Did she beg before your boss blew her apart? The man's face turned purple. His feet kicked uselessly against the floor. Alessandro. Grace's voice was hoarse. Alessandro, stop. He didn't seem to hear her. The darkness in his eyes was absolute, a void where nothing human lived. Alessandro. She pushed off the wall, crossed the distance between them, and laid her hand on his arm. He's not worth it. Look at me, please. Slowly, like a man waking from a nightmare, his gaze shifted to her face. The darkness flickered, wavered. Marco and Emily are safe, she said softly. In the panic room. It's over. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Alessandro's grip loosened. The man dropped to the floor, gasping, and Alessandro turned away from him like he'd ceased to exist. You're hurt. His hands found her face. Gentle now. Impossibly gentle. Your head. There's blood. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're bleeding. His voice cracked. When I saw them grab you, I thought I was going to lose someone else. I thought... You didn't. She covered his hands with hers. I'm here. I'm alive. You saved me. He pulled her into his arms and held her like the world was ending. Like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Like she was everything. Benedetti's dead, he murmured against her hair. The parley was a trap, but I knew it would be. I let them think they'd won, and then I burned them all. Is it over? It's over. He pulled back to look at her. Grace, Papa? They both turned. Marco stood in the doorway, Emily hovering behind him. His dark eyes were wide, his small body trembling. But for the first time in over a year, his mouth was moving. Papa? His voice was rusty, barely audible, the voice of a boy who hadn't used it in so long he'd almost forgotten how. Papa, don't leave. Alessandro made a sound that might have been a sob. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropped to his knees and pulled his son against his chest. I'm not leaving. His voice shook. Never. I'm never leaving you again. Marco's arms wrapped around his father's neck. And then, quiet as a whisper, broken as a prayer. Love you, Papa. Grace watched them through tears she didn't try to hide. Emily's hand found hers and squeezed tight. This was it, she realized. This was what she'd been searching for her whole life without knowing it. Not safety, not security, but this broken, beautiful family that had found each other in the wreckage of grief and violence and fear. She was home. 1 year later, Grace stood in the garden and watched Marco chase fireflies across the lawn. The summer evening was warm and golden, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and the distant hum of cicadas. Fairy lights had been strung through the trees for Emily's graduation party, casting everything in a soft, magical glow. Somewhere behind her, she could hear laughter and clinking glasses, the sounds of a family celebrating. Her family. So much had changed in 12 months. The Benedetti threat had been neutralized, permanently, in ways Grace didn't ask about and Alessandro didn't explain. The estate had been rebuilt, reinforced, transformed from a fortress into something that actually felt like a home. Emily had finished her degree and was starting law school in the fall. And Marco. Marco was a different child. He talked now. Not constantly, not easily, but in small bursts that grew longer every week. He asked questions. He laughed at jokes. He called Grace by name, and sometimes, in quiet moments, he called her something else. Something that made her heart crack open every time she heard it. Mama. You're doing that thing again. Alessandro's voice came from behind her, warm with amusement. The thing where you stare at our son like you can't quite believe he's real. Grace smiled and leaned back into him as his arms wrapped around her waist. I can't. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and have to check that this isn't all a dream. If it is, I don't want to wake up. She turned in his arms to face him. He looked different than he had a year ago. Lighter somehow. The shadows under his eyes had faded. The permanent tension in his shoulders had eased. He smiled more, laughed more, lived more. She had done that. She and Marco together, slowly coaxing the man out from behind the monster, teaching him that love didn't have to end in loss. I have something for you. Alessandro reached into his pocket. I was going to wait until after the party, but you've never been patient. Not when it comes to you. He pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's heart stopped. The night you found Marco, he said quietly. I thought it was chance, a coincidence, a lucky accident in a universe that had given me nothing but pain. He opened the box, and inside lay a ring, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, glittering like captured starlight. But I don't believe that anymore. I believe you were meant to find him, meant to find me. I believe that some things are written in the stars, and you, Grace Lawson, were written in mine. Alessandro, you gave me my son back. You gave me hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like. You walked into the darkness of my world and refused to leave, even when everything told you to run. His voice cracked. I love you. I've loved you since the moment you stood in your tiny apartment and told me you weren't most people. I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if there's anything after this. He sank to one knee. I know I'm not an easy man. I know my world is dangerous, my past is bloody, my future is uncertain. But I swear to you, on my son's life, on everything I am and everything I hope to become, I will spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of you. He looked up at her with those dark eyes, and everything else fell away. Grace Lawson, will you marry me? She was crying. When had she started crying? Tears streamed down her face and she didn't care, didn't try to stop them. Yes. The word came out half laughing, half sobbing. Yes, you impossible man. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and rose to his feet, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like champagne and tears and forever. Behind them, someone cheered. Emily, probably. And then more voices joined in. the whole party erupting in celebration. But Grace barely heard them. She was too busy holding on to the man she loved, the man who had given her everything she never knew she needed. Mama! Papa! They broke apart to find Marco racing toward them, his dark hair wild, his eyes bright with joy. He launched himself at them, and Alessandro caught him easily, pulling all three of them into an embrace. "Are you getting married?" Marco demanded. "For real? Like in the movies?" "For real." Grace laughed and kissed his forehead. "Is that okay with you?" "It's perfect." He threw his arms around her neck. "I wished for this. Every night, I wished." Grace met Alessandro's eyes over their son's head. She saw her own wonder reflected back at her, the disbelief that life could be this good, this full, this right. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." He pulled them both closer. "Both of you. Always." Later, after the party had wound down and Marco had fallen asleep in his bed clutching his favorite stuffed bear, Grace stood on the balcony of the master bedroom and looked out at the stars. She thought about the night that had changed everything. The rain, the empty street, the little boy who had found her when he needed her most. She thought about fear and courage, about darkness and light, about the strange and winding paths that led people to each other. She had walked home alone that night, exhausted and struggling, expecting nothing but more of the same. And instead, she had found a child, a family, a love that had transformed her from the inside out. Arms wrapped around her from behind. Alessandro's chin rested on her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. "What are you thinking about?" "About how different my life would be if I'd taken a different route home that night." "Don't." His arms tightened. "Don't think about that. You're here now. That's all that matters." "I know." She turned to face him, her hands resting on his chest. "I'm just grateful. For the accident that wasn't an accident. For the lost boy who found me. For you." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Soft and slow and full of promise. "Come to bed," he murmured. "Tomorrow we start planning a wedding. Tonight, I just want to hold you." Grace smiled and let him lead her inside. She had spent so long taking care of everyone else, her mother, her sister, her patients. She had forgotten what it felt like to be taken care of, to be protected, to be loved so fiercely and completely that it felt like standing in sunlight after a lifetime of cold. But she remembered now, and she would never forget again. She had helped a lost child on a rainy night, not knowing where it would lead. It had led her here, to this man, to this family, to a love she would carry with her for the rest of her days. And as she fell asleep in Alessandro's arms, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, Grace Lawson knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.